So good morning, everyone, and welcome to this will be now the sixth webinar in the Strategic Portfolio Management webinar series that we are hosting. As usual, the webinar will last approximately 25 minutes, so you will all hopefully join all your upcoming meetings. We will leave 5 minutes towards the end for potential questions that you may have. And without further ado, I guess we will start. Short round of introductions as usual. Myself, Christoph, one of the co-founders of Quisto, Strategy Portfolio Management Consulting and Technology House. And together with me is Jakub, whom you can see on the screen as well, the other co-founder and CEO of Quisto. Good morning, Jakub. How are you doing?
Good morning,
today?
Christoph. All good. How are you?
Very good. Good as well. Thank you. Ready for the hopefully strategy execution part of the session today. All right, so what we will cover today is strategic impact, which we believe might be really seen as the missing link between strategy in a form of probably strategy execution or definition, sorry, and execution, which is usually seen as the big challenge for many organizations. All right, but let me start with short, just change the slide, short introduction to the SPM domain in general. As you can see on the slide, we believe, and not only we, probably this is defined also by Gartner, for instance, that SPM in an essence is about increasing companies' value. That the value can be derived by actually launching new initiatives that organizations should be able to properly analyze and prioritize. Those initiatives may come from various different places of the organizations and be of different forms and types, have different kind of risk versus reward profiles, like launching new products and services, entering new markets, bringing some new operational excellence type of initiatives, and so on. And of course, taking care of the kind of all of the mandatory projects and initiatives that should actually be taken into account as well. All right, so that's about the SPM and the short intro to the SPM. Now let's jump to the strategy execution part, and let me start with this one statistic that actually says that according to many management consulting organizations out there, McKinsey's, Deloitte's, PwC's of the world, that majority of the executives actually do not have faith and don't believe that their strategy plans will eventually succeed. And today we will try to show you very powerful and to some extent intuitive and very easy to use tools and methods that you can apply to your organizations to ensure that you will eventually go with all of your initiatives into the right direction. Okay, so on the next slide, before I hand over to Jakub and we will try to dig into those tools and methods, let me bring this IRVDS toolset that you see now on the screen, that we believe is the complete 360-degree view of any new initiative. Can be of a very high strategic importance, can be of kind of operational excellence nature. However, the point is always the same, that you should analyze those initiatives from multiple dimensions. Like one will be the quantitative assessment. So you take into account the business case, you sort of plan for all your financials and so on and so forth. You try to navigate, as we discussed last week, through uncertainty. And the other dimensions are more of a qualitative nature, and those include impact, risk, and sustainability. Today, we will focus primarily on the impact, strategic impact. As we said, this is the missing link between strategy execution. Jakub, how do you think, like, how this strategic impact assessment can help executives and sort of senior leadership teams to ensure that they increase actually their chances of a strategic strategy being a success story in the end. Would you mind elaborating on that, please?
I believe that the strategic impact or strategic fit tool, because the naming patterns are different in different organizations, but we are talking about, as you have mentioned, qualitative scoring tool, is mainly designed to align everything which is going on around new initiatives, new strategic projects with corporate strategy. And it is like a hierarchical system, simple hierarchical system, which mainly serves to align everyone, so that at each stage of the process, the stakeholders are thinking through the lens of corporate strategy, with, of course, appropriate level of details depending on the place in the organizations they are, and of course depending on the types of initiatives they are working with. But so it is like, in my thinking, it is an alignment tool.
So let's see those details in a bit of I think that they are presented on this slide. So would you mind telling us a little bit more on how we can come up with this kind of one consolidated score as this is presented on this chart? And what does it mean? Like how can you go about building this kind of structure? What does it give you?
So what you want to achieve through this strategic impact or strategic fit analysis is to have some kind of score, mark for different initiatives. So you can compare, you can rank between, and this score, on one hand, let's say having the portfolio context, a lot of initiatives, a lot of projects, high complexity. On one hand, you would like to have it in a very simplified way, hopefully in a one-digit kind of metric. And in the same time, this score needs to contain quite a lot of information inside. Therefore, we propose this ranking tree approach. I mean, ranking tree is a tool which helps to measure strategic impact or strategic fit. And this ranking tree, as you can see on the screen, it's like a hierarchical tree, which contains quite a lot of different types of information, which are aggregated so that you can unfold this one simple metric and have more in-depth information about why is it at this level or another level, based on a predefined standardized approach. And in this example, you may see total project score, which is the final one metric to compare, which you're looking at the end, which contains of 3 layers of information. The first layer we call strategic vectors. Strategic vectors aggregate strategic directions, and strategic directions aggregate impact factors. So this is like a 3-level hierarchical structure, and depending on the situation, depending on your requirements, you may unfold this one single total project score into more detailed information. See where does actually this score comes from. And I think that this is one of the keys to this whole, let's say, impact assessment, to have appropriate structure of data, hierarchical, built in a hierarchical way. And of course, in between, you may find weights. Therefore, if we compare, for example, strategic direction A and strategic direction B, strategic direction A might be more important than strategic direction B, or slightly more important or less important. Therefore, those weights also help you to manage this hierarchical structure. It might seem quite, let's say, complex at this moment, but in fact, this is probably, out of all of those tools we have been discussing, the IRBDS kind of set of different tools, this one is probably the most likable and actually most simplistic and the easiest to work with. Of course, as soon as you are able to build it. Nevertheless, it is very straightforward tool.
So the whole point of this ranking tree is actually to translate your overall strategy in a way to this kind of a ranking tree-like form. so that you can see your strategic goals and directions here. You can see the different impact factors that actually are sort of connected with those strategic directions. You sort of calibrate it, and in the end you get this TPS, or total project score, strategic impact score.
Yes, exactly. So if we may put some kind of an example here, you may see that, for example, vectors can be broken down into internal and external things. So internal strength, can we do it? Are we capable of doing this? Are we experienced? Do we have, let's say, a proper know-how and competence to proceed with certain initiatives? And the external one, which is about usually market opportunity, whether there is market, what is our competitive position? Are we let's say, entering new markets or entering new growth markets? Below that, when you consider strategic directions, you may think about, let's say, things like we would like to go green. So we would like to, let's say, improve our carbon footprint, for example, as a part of our strategy. So you may see that this is the link there. And if you go to the impact factor level, then you have very more precise things like we are reducing, let's say, greenhouse gas emissions by X, or if we consider the market factors, we are entering, let's say, new market segment with a growth rate of 5% or more. And having those kind of information structured and built in a hierarchical way, you may easily work with this tool at many different levels of aggregation, using total project score for portfolio comparisons, and more detailed information on a single project level to understand its characteristics, its alignment with the strategy, its fit to our strategy.
Right. So let's now talk shortly about how can you actually go about building this kind of structure. That's the first thing. The second part is that you also said in the beginning that it is in a sense a very crowdsourced or collaborative exercise. And the third aspect should be that you said is very likable part of this strategic assessment, meaning that it's probably very easy to use by the actual audience, right? So would you mind elaborating on the process? How you can actually go about defining it, coming up with this structure?
As you have said, this whole method contains a lot of different incentives for the organizations. Of course, the first and the main one being the capability to measure strategic fit in a let's say in a score way. But of course, there are other things, and we will talk about those more, let's call them soft aspects during the next webinar. So how to use this tool to engage people, how to promote entrepreneurship, etc. But let's today focus on the basics. So this is like a process how to build this tool inside of the organization. So starting from the framework, so the framework is actually the structure of the ranking tree you've seen on the previous slide. So the appropriate hierarchical structure. So creating the list of strategic directions and impact factors. So thinking about what is important let's say, aligning with the strategy. Of course, the strategic directions may come directly from your corporate strategy, for example, but impact factors are more detailed parts of strategic directions, which should be, let's say, questions and answers, basically. So if we think about impact factors, the lowest level in this ranking tree, we are thinking about actually a questionnaire. So impact factors are actually questions which should be answered in an appropriate standardized way and provide information for the higher level of strategic directions. Describing those impact factors, what do they mean? So for example, we may have a question, impact factor about intellectual property rights. So our company heads towards being innovative and promotes creating intellectual property rights. So you may come up with an impact factor, whether a particular initiative has the patenting opportunity, for example. And you may have a set of predefined answers to that, starting from no, we are not creating any patents with these initiatives, and even more, let's say, tough, like we need to buy technology from third parties, up to this initiative has a clear path for patenting, and therefore it scores higher, and therefore it contributes more to our innovation strategy, etc. And of course, at the end of the day, it improves the total impact score. Defining those questions inside of impact factors and also appropriate sets of answers is the key to success here. And setting up this framework is like the first major step to build this this tool. And next step is to understand how all of those factors and strategic directions interact with each other. And we call it this part of the creation process as calibration. Therefore, we try to compare all of the impact factors between each other, all the strategic directions between each other, and try to understand which of those are more important and which are less important, so that the tree also contains this kind of priority, because it is unlikely that you will have all of the factors and all the strategic directions on the same level. It is a standard thing that some of the things are more important than the others, but yet you would like to still have this kind of visibility even of those items which are less important. Therefore, calibration process at each level, strategic direction level, vector level, and impact factor level is another thing. And then last but not least is testing. So basically dry running the ranking tree to test whether it all makes sense, whether it requires some manual tweaking is also a very important part of this process before you can launch it in production, let's call it like that.
Right, and one before we jump to the next slide, like it looks like there's work to be done before you can even start actually assessing the impact. But once the framework is defined and it's calibrated, how often you believe it needs to be changed, or how easy it is to adapt it when sort of set of market conditions or strategic directions are actually changing?
I mean, everyone who follows our webinars knows that we are promoting agile approach to strategic portfolio management. Therefore, the answer is agile. So there are no strict rules about recalibrating or changing the structure there. But what we are saying, and what is our opinion about it, is that you should create it in a way that it is ready for changes. I cannot answer, and it doesn't make sense to answer whether it should once a year, or once a quarter, but maybe once a year you should at least revise it. But again, this structure should not be subject to dramatic changes in each quarter, because then you will create some kind of informational chaos. But I would recommend, and this is like a practice we've seen across different industries and different customers, is that at least once a year there is this kind of revision session for the whole framework, and some smaller, usually smaller tweaks are of course implemented. It's a different story when the company introduces completely new strategy or makes some kind of a strategic pivot, like the whole organization. Then probably you need to rebuild the ranking tree from scratch. But in a case of a regular, let's say, cycle, usually at least once a year, the teams are gathering and thinking whether this should be somehow changed or adjusted.
So it looks like this ranking tree toolset can really help transform the strategy and all of the strategic goals and directions into this kind of form that can be then exercised by all teams that are working on different initiatives in many different places of the organization. It will be then unique for every organization if it is to represent an organization strategy, because in the end, every organization have probably a unique strategy that is different than any other. So let's maybe slowly start concluding before we jump to the Q&A part. Like, What would you say, Jakub, are the main takeaways for our audience from today's webinar about this missing link strategy and execution? So it doesn't feel like strategy is a set of nice PowerPoint presentation that is a result of some kind of senior leadership meeting. And then it's when, as you sort of jump back to the business as usual routine, you are not really sure how do you assess against this PowerPoint and those goals, and how you can convince people that actually it makes sense to proceed with the one or the other initiative. So what are the takeaways, Jakub, from today's webinar?
Okay, I think that first of all, this impact tool, strategic impact, or strategic fit, they may be used interchangeably, may be a critical tool in the company's toolset. In some cases, it may be the only one. I believe in that in some cases, it is even more important for portfolio prioritization than the traditional financial measures, because it's easier to implement, and especially in small organizations, it might be very efficient. So it is, I mean, my favorite tool. let's go like that. And the takeaways about this whole approach comes down to, let's call it, design principles for building the ranking tree, building this method inside of the organization. And I think that those design principles should be as follows. So first of all, transparency. So it needs to be properly discussed, properly communicated, properly explained, and of course, properly iterated with the teams, so that all of the contents you have seen, both on the framework level, like all the strategic directions, definitions, impact factors, questions and answers used in the process, they need to be communicated, discussed, and let's say commonly understood by the stakeholders. Crowdsourcing is another way. It's a great tool to engage people who are usually not part of the process. So this tool offers a lot of opportunity for co-working, co-creation, which we'll discuss, by the way, on the next webinar. So this is another important factor. Accessibility is also very important, so that this data which is created in this process, it is distributed, it is accessible, it is comparable for people who are engaged in the process. And again, portfolio comparability. So this tool has been also built or created or designed to address portfolio issues. And therefore this hierarchical structure, so that we may have those different nuances underneath, and we may also differentiate the structure between different project types, for example, but at the end, you are looking at this one simplified score. And the method tries to standardize, at least at those aggregate levels, between different project types, so you may compare different projects on a portfolio level. And the last one, which is kind of naive maybe, but I very strongly believe that it is very important that it should be visual. So this scoring tool, let's say, enables and offers a lot of cool visualizations. And those visualizations are very attractive for the stakeholders. They are fast to interpret, fast to understand, fast to use, basically, and yet they are very powerful with their information capacity. So visualization and the way you are presenting the results and analyzing in an interactive way is also very, very important to this, let's say, implementation of this method.
Right. Thank you, Jakub, for that. I think we have now exactly 5 minutes left for some of the questions. So let me jump to the Q&A part. Sorry, that's the one. Before we do, Jakub already sort of like advertised for our upcoming session next Tuesday, when we will talk about leveraging this ecosystem of various stakeholders internally and externally, and sort of like boosting entrepreneurship within organizations, and how you can work in a very collaborative environment, so that everyone understands what is the impact and how it is actually contributing to the overall strategy. Next Tuesday, 8:30 a.m. as usual. Now let's see what are the questions. Try to answer that. Like, can you give some examples of various impact factors companies typically use, and how many they typically use? Like, just a few examples to give our audience an idea of how many different impact factors we are talking here about.
Examples are difficult as those at the level of impact factors. There are, kind of a lot of differences. So it's uneasy to come up with very straight examples. But I think that things which are kind of popular are related, for example, to competence availability inside of the organization. So like trying to understand whether the project actually fits what we have, what we are, let's say, experiencing, what we have know-how for. Another part of, or a different example is related, for example, to market competitive position, whether the new initiative will strengthen or be neutral, for example, to our market share or our market positioning. Another example which I mentioned during this webinar is, for example, related to intellectual property rights, whether we are creating some patenting opportunities. Are we creating intellectual property rights in the process, which is very important for innovation, basically. So those are the examples, and the number of impact factors. Again, it's not a standard thing, and my understanding is that less is more. So usually, when companies, or we are helping the companies to start with this tool, I would guess, this is like my guesstimate, that we land at like something around 30 impact factors. Then we reduce this during the calibration process, because soon it occurs that some of the factors are not relevant actually. And I would say that the average is something between 18 maybe to 20. And this is like a number of impact factors which is detailed enough and usually sufficiently covers the issue, the problem which we are trying to solve here. And in the same time, it is, let's say, manageable.
So the last questions probably we may take here is about those various perspectives people may have about a particular initiative, and how do you then decide like which initiatives to launch and so on when it comes to those subjective points of view from different stakeholders?
This whole method is actually built for reducing the subjectiveness and aligning people. So the whole framework should be designed in a way that it doesn't produce this kind of, I have a different opinion. It should be objectifying the reality. And of course, if you take scores and answers from different users, you will have deviations between them. But then it's a great way to have a very clear view on what items needs to be discussed and aligned. And you may find the outliers, so people who are actually seeing reality in a completely different way, very valuable, because you may start to see things which are difficult to see, basically, or at least you may see that the people are not aligned with each other, and you need to focus more on alignment. So in both ways, you are improving very much with regards to looking at different initiatives and looking at the portfolio value.
Right. Thank you, Jakub, for that. I'm afraid we will not be able to take the last question, but we promise that we will elaborate. I will just answer. Yes, you understand it right. This is the way of working, which will educate the trained organization. So it is also educational for the organization. Yes. Has this aspect of education definitely in it. But we will elaborate more on that during our next webinar, next Tuesday, 8:30 a.m., as I said. So thank you for today's session. Thank you for attending it. Jakub, thank you for your time, for all the insights shared. I wish you all have a great day and great start to the week. See you next time.
Krzysztof. Thank you, Krzysztof. Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers,
have a good one. Cheers. Bye-bye.